Hey OHM, this month for our July safety training, we are going to be talking about cuts and burns. Now, I know when we talk restaurant and kitchen safety, it seems like it's only applicable to maybe properties who either are a food and beverage business or maybe have a kitchen on site that you're working in directly. But the truth is, all of us really are susceptible to cuts and burns in the kitchen, whether that's at work directly or indirectly, or maybe at home as well. So this training is going to be for everyone, whether you're a seasoned chef or maybe this is your first time working a job where you have a kitchen on site. But following these basic guidelines is going to help us to avoid common injuries such as cuts and burns. I also want to make a note here that if you experience a cut or burn at work, it's important that you always report that, even if it seems really minor to you. So make sure you work with your supervisor and always report if any of these happen to you. For cuts and knife safety, we're just going to go through some tips and tricks, just some basics that are going to help you prevent cuts and injury on the job. So keeping knives sharp is critical. A sharp knife is actually safer than a dull one, believe it or not. Another trick is to, when you cut, use the proper form. So you want to tuck your fingers like that bottom picture, cutting the eggplant, maybe it looks like. So tuck your fingers on the hand that's holding the food. One thing they're not doing in this picture is wearing cut gloves, but those protective cut gloves are also going to help in preventing cuts and injuries working in the kitchen or cutting. So be sure that you're always wearing proper PPE as well. You should also always use a cutting board. And a pro tip here is if you place a damp cloth underneath the board, that will help it prevent slipping. So you just take a damp washcloth or rag, get it wet, and then lay it on the counter underneath the cutting board. And that's going to help the cutting board stay in place so that it prevents the sliding, which ultimately will prevent cuts. Now, it's really important here that we always use appropriate knives for the job. And if we're in a bind or maybe all the dishes are dirty, all the utensils are just unavailable, we should never substitute a knife for other tools or vice versa. So make sure if it requires a knife for cutting, we use a knife, and we never use a knife if it would be better off using scissors or another tool. And then we should always store knives in a knife block or a rack. You should never lay knives loose in a drawer or left just laying in soapy water in the sink, because unfortunately that's where a lot of accidents do occur. Someone may reach in the sink trying to pull the drain out or something, and little did they know there's a sharp knife laying in there and they cut their hand. So a lot of those incidents are very preventable by safe storage practices. Looking at burn prevention, here's some basics. We should always keep our hair, clothing, and flammable materials away from open flames. And then make sure that when we are using those burners, adjust the flame so that it covers only the bottom portion of the pan. You don't want it extending out past that. And then another big one is to never let the pot handles extend past the edge of the range. That's going to prevent us from hitting it with our bodies and possibly getting burned or knocking the pan off the range. Maybe it lands on us somewhere else or on somebody else, or splatters, and that's where a lot of burns happen as well. Housekeeping is always going to be important, so make sure we're cleaning grill and stove surfaces regularly so that we're able to prevent those grease flare-ups, which also cause a lot of burns. And then make sure we don't overheat pans that contain oils in them, because that can also create an issue. And just a side note, something to look for here, if you ever find something is leaking oil, maybe it's a fryer or something like that, be sure and report any of those things that you see as well to your supervisor, the chief engineer, whoever that is who needs to know to perform the maintenance. But we want to make sure if we ever see any oil leaking out, that's a big, not only a fire hazard, but could create some major injuries as well. And when we're using, moving different pots and pans, make sure you're using pot holders or gloves or oven mitts if you're handling hot objects. And that includes, pulling something out of the oven, grabbing something off the stove, anything like that. And then make sure that we're using proper cooking tools to prevent contact with hot surfaces and foods. So just be smart. It's okay to take a minute and pause before you get started in whatever task you're about to complete and think through, okay, what do I need here in order to prevent burns? If the surface is hot, what do I need to do so that I do not injure myself? Some more tips for burn prevention. Don't stand too close or lean over hot oil. Remember, that's going to splatter up. So make sure that we're protecting our body parts and doing that by staying a safe distance away from it. Always wait for oil to cool before straining or carrying it. And never leave hot oil or grease unattended. Here's some good ones. So when we're opening maybe a pot that has hot liquid in it, make sure you're opening that with the lid away from your body so that the steam goes out away from you. Steam burns are painful and very preventable as well. And when you're adding ingredients into a hot pan, make sure you add them kind of away from your body so that it's not splattering up toward you. And when you're working on a range, make sure you, again, turn those handles so they don't hang over the edge. That's going to help you not knock it with your body and either burn yourself, injure someone else. It could splatter if it fell off of the burner. And again, make sure we adjust the burner flame so it only covers the bottom portion of the pan. That's very critical here. When you're coming up behind someone, make sure you're announcing yourself, especially if they have a hot pan. That's going to help them know where to turn and where to move with it so they don't turn around and run into you with a hot item in their hands. So I'd encourage you this month to just make sure you have those conversations with your team. Be aware of potential cut and burn incidents, and make sure that if you are to ever experience a cut or burn, that you report that to your supervisor so we can make sure that we monitor that improvement of your injuries and also talk about preventing that in the future.